On the surface, heading into 2014, I thought WWE was potentially positioned to really change the game for themselves and really make this a signature turning point kind of year for the company, especially on a long term basis, and perhaps even make 2014 the year of WWE. I thought there was some of that potential. There was some of that possibility. And there's a few reasons for that. One, you had a lot of new faces in terms of the on screen product itself, providing the WWE perhaps with a refreshing new look, a new perspective, and, kind of rebooting things because you can only go in a certain direction with the certain people for so long before eventually those people are going to start to go away and phase out. And you have to refresh and reload and start anew. And it would appear that the WWE understood this finally in 2014 and was finally going in that direction. Then you also had the big exciting news of the launch of the WWE network, which was an indication perhaps that the WWE understood that for years they had rebelled against the thing that they should have been embracing, which was the internet, something new, a bold venture. And the WWE for years had fought it. But now in 2014, you could say that the WWE was not only grasping the concept of social media and the internet as a whole, but was potentially looking at it as a way to generate new additional revenue streams and overall larger revenue streams, and potentially being an industry leader when it comes to sports and entertainment and media as a whole, of being the type of company that goes where the consumer is and has that 24/7, 365 accessibility for their paying customers. And you also had the future, expected boon from a new television deal. The deal with NBC Universal is set to expire in mid 2014. So you were going to assume that the WWE, based off of certain indicators, if nothing else, time and the consistent ratings that they were still drawing, and with some of these other things going on, that they would be able to double, if not at least triple, their television rights fees and revenues that they got from their NBC Universal deal, either again with NBC Universal or maybe going to somewhere else. So there were a lot of things that could make you hopeful and make you sit there and say, hey, 2014 could shape up to be a tremendous year for the WWE. And when it comes to the television deal, I think frankly that was going to be the most important thing overall because with all the new faces and new places, and the launch of the WWE network, the thing that I think was going to support that, at least initially and over the next couple of years, and allow some of these changes to take place and allow the WWE network to be sustainable and allow it to thrive, even as it has some growing pains in its initial launch period, it was going to be the massive increase, the expected massive increase from the television rights that would allow all of these necessary long term changes to take place and occur. And there was a lot of potential for it, it seemed like, in theory. You're looking at NASCAR's deal. They're a company that averages less in terms of overall viewership than the WWE does. And again, the WWE is not an 8 or 9 month a year product. They are a 12-month every single year product. There are 52 weeks of original programming every single year and deliver consistently strong ratings from a cable television standpoint. Better than NASCAR. And you're talking about a NASCAR whose most recent television deal between the two different deals is close to, I believe, about 7 billion with a B, excuse me, dollars for an 8 year period. So a monster deal for NASCAR. It was a little bit under that, but you get the general parameters of it. It was a big deal for NASCAR. But WWE potentially had the ability to say, hey, you're paying them all this money, but we give you more programming at a higher average viewership than NASCAR does. You look at NHL's deal domestically. I'm not talking about what they get through Canada via that monster deal they signed with Rogers Broadcasting, that 12-year, $5.5 billion deal. Talking about domestically where they get $200 million from the NBC family, and you're sitting there and saying, well, WWE does a much bigger number on a week in, week out basis. And again, instead of being a 6 or 7 month type of thing, it's a year round thing. They've got to be able to get a lot more money than the NHL does, especially here in the United States. And then once I found out that MLS, Major League Soccer here in the United States, got close to 90 million a year for maybe a 15th or a 20th of the total overall viewership that the WWE gets, I said, wow, the potential there for the WWE to double, triple at least at the very worst, their overall television rights fees domestically is there. And when you look at it, their last deal was domestically, and I'm not talking about all the international TV deals, just talking about domestically through NBC Universal. You talk about a deal whose average value was a little over $100 to $110 million per year. So with all these other things and potentially some leverage of being able to shop around if you're the WWE and having a Viacom want to buy in, some other companies like Disney maybe wanting to buy in, you had the potential leverage there of trying to create a real or at least perceived bidding war that could also do what? Elevate the asking price. Now, I know I've said before that I would sit there and start trying to go after NASCAR money. Well, that's the basics of negotiations. Knowing that you're going to ask for way too much, they are going to incredibly lowball you on the other side, and at some point in time, you whittle away until you come to common ground. And a good deal is a deal that both sides are happy with, but you want to be happier than the other side in order for it to really truly be a good deal on your side. So if you could get them to move up more than you move down, you win. And the only way you do that is to ensure that you go and leverage yourself as effectively as you possibly can, getting as many potential suitors and bidders in as possible, and being able to leverage your product and its benefits against deals like NASCAR's and NHL's and Major League Soccer's in order, like I said, to realistically or at least artificially for your purposes, drive up the overall price and create some type of bidding war. But the problem is several fold for the WWE when it comes to getting a new television deal. Number one is that the WWE's fan base historically has low average annual household income. That's been a problem for professional wrestling for years. Wealthy people just don't watch wrestling by and large. A lot of well-off people, a lot of college graduates don't watch professional wrestling. So professional wrestling's typical audience are high school graduates, maybe some college, more likely than not a lot of high school dropouts, and guys and families in general that are in the 50 to 60,000 a year annual household income or less bracket. And the problem with that is that that's not historically been very appealing to television stations in terms of advertising rights and the fees that these television stations can charge to advertisers, because wrestling has always produced, by and large, very strong ratings with non-corresponding ad dollars. You could sit there and draw twice the ratings of what an NHL game might, but the average household income and the average spending level of an NHL fan might be 2 or 3 times what it is for the average wrestling fan. As a result, that advertiser is looking at bang for the buck, not just in terms of the overall size and scope of people that they're going to be able to reach. So something like professional wrestling, a form of entertainment like professional wrestling, like the WWE has with their sports entertainment scripted product, they do monster cable television ratings consistently, week in and week out. But because of the perceptions, both actual and perceived, in terms of the reality of wrestling fans just don't make a lot of money. They are not the most appealing to advertisers. This is something that Vince has always had to battle. This is something that Vince and the WWE has always tried to combat and deal with, because those advertisers don't pay as much for wrestling in its ratings as they would for NASCAR in its ratings, or MLS in its ratings, or NHL in its ratings, because again, they look at the socioeconomic factors. This is something that a lot of people seem to not understand. So there's also that thing of not wanting to start a new precedent. For so many years, professional wrestling, sports entertainment, whatever you want to call it, has had this history of producing strong ratings without the network having to put a lot into it and not getting a lot in terms of ad dollars. So why pay them a ton of money to put their product on your TV in terms of the wrestling companies? Why would you want to start that precedent now? You also have to deal with the fact that WWE's business, you're talking about stagnant to declining ratings over the past several years, and stagnant to declining revenues, and stagnant to declining profit margins over the past few years. And that's there, and that's a reality. So these are, again, problems that WWE has to deal with, not to mention the concerns over the WWE network and how it pissed off some of the cable and satellite providers and some of these potential networks and corporations that could potentially be buying into the WWE in terms of having them be a part of their broadcasting family on their networks, on their programming. They might be concerned that the WWE network is going to undercut the overall value of the product and undermine what would be shown on live television that they're paying these astronomical rights fees for. So, you look at it, it's an example of maybe they should have secured the TV deal before they launched the network. Again, all this time to get to it, and then they hurried up and rushed through it and didn't fully think things out. And I think it's also in part an indication of a problem of Vince McMahon and the WWE by and large for many years, and that is a failure in basic leveraging and, in particular, corporate contract negotiations. It's just the way it is. I mean, we can sit here and talk all we want about Vince McMahon being a badass and Vince McMahon not being intimidated by anybody, and that might be true. But sometimes it's not just about will, it's about skill when it comes to leveraging yourself effectively and going through basic negotiations. I've worked in sales for years. Negotiations are part of the thing. And if you don't understand how to leverage yourself and your product ahead of somebody else's, even if it isn't better than somebody else's, and you don't understand the art of negotiation, you're never going to succeed, and that's just the way it is. And then we ultimately get the results. The bottom line is that WWE's new television deal is a disaster for the WWE in certain respects. There's no question about it. Instead of going from maybe getting 100 to 110 million a year for their domestic television rights through NBC Universal and getting maybe 200 to 250 or 300 million or a little bit more, maybe something more commensurate with what the WWE should be getting based off of their average annual ratings that all of their product provides to the NBC Universal family. They got basically about a 50% domestic increase, about 160 million per year. When you throw in the other international deals, you're talking about 200 million per year. Whoopsie daisies. That's not that much of a revenue increase. Even if you're talking about some staggering towards the end of the deal where the value grows, you're talking about being locked into something for several years and not getting that much of an increase. A successful increase for the WWE that would have helped again to offset the loss of the pay-per-view business due to the WWE network, help support the initial startup cost and make up for any initial hiccups or snafus in the WWE network's business model, was going to come from the massive increase, the expected massive rights fees increase from the new television deal for the WWE. And it's just not there. It didn't happen. Instead of getting 100 to 150 to 200% of an increase domestically, they got about 50. That's a disaster. Not nearly what I believe the WWE was expecting to get. I fully believe that they were expecting to get 300 to 400 million a year domestically, but they didn't understand how to leverage and position themselves and negotiate themselves into a position where they could demand and command and ultimately receive 300 to 400 million a year domestically for their U.S. television rights. And now they're dealing with an expected revenue shortfall because they're not getting nearly the money they expected to get. So this failure to get this expected and necessary revenue increase that the company and certain people in the stock market business and advisors and investors have expected to come. They believe this bullshit that the WWE is going to get this huge boon of a television deal and is going to bring all these new revenues to the company. It's going to compensate for all of these things short term, and long term is going to position the company even more strongly on a domestic and international basis. It didn't come. It didn't happen. And the stock price, not surprisingly to me, plummeted as a result. The WWE stock price was incredibly artificially overvalued. And you'll see that often with the stock market, that certain stocks, for whatever reason, just shoot up and up and up and up and up and up and up. It's almost like a wave. It's almost like a trend, but that wave, that trend is going to come crashing back down to earth, and it finally has for the WWE, and they've leveled out to more of where reality is. And that's not a good thing either, because even though they're right back in the same position they were maybe several months ago, now people are seeing what the potential of that stock price could be and where it actually is, and they're assuming a lot of failures that maybe are there, but also maybe aren't there. But most importantly of all, I think this finally raises some significant and necessary and important to ask questions about the number one problem with the WWE, its management. This calls the executive management of WWE into question. Their leadership, their tactics, their business strategies, their business model. I've talked about for several years now the fact that WWE is out of touch, and that goes beyond just the on screen television product, that goes into the business world. And I see a lot of things you could sit there and say, some guy with a Hulk Hogan banner and some other stuff in the background might not know much about business. Well, I'm versed enough in business and understand enough about business, even on a smaller level, to understand when I see potential outliers of big time problems to come. And you're talking about a company, again, with stagnant to declining television ratings, stagnant to declining operating revenue, stagnant to declining profits. You're talking about having to continue to deplete that cash on hand to pay out dividends to your shareholders, to help support the WWE network, to in part make up for that expected revenue boom that didn't come from this television deal. These are all things that I think finally, if anything else, will raise some significant and important and necessary questions about the leadership of WWE, the executive management of the WWE, and whether this company is really heading in the right direction or not. I've talked about before, the WWE is in trouble. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean that that trouble isn't there. It might take a few years for that trouble to rear its ugly head. But based off of what we're seeing in 2014, especially with the kind of semi-disastrous launch of the WWE network from a business standpoint, and then here, the failure to get that huge expected boon in television rights fees from NBC Universal or some other provider, it really makes you understand that the WWE is not on as solid footing as they once were. And maybe they're a part of a dying business overall. And it also, in a way, to me, invalidates some of the PG WWE logic that we've heard for years. In part, the reason to go to the PG philosophy was that it was going to bring in more advertisers, that were going to bring in more revenue. Well, you've been PG since 2008. During that whole time under your NBC Universal television contract, apparently it didn't really work. And apparently it really didn't bring in those added additional advertising dollars that you were expecting, because Vince for years has been searching for those high dollar advertisers that just frankly aren't going to come with professional wrestling, especially when you were drawing less than half of the business you did a decade ago. So now the WWE, by converting and shifting to this PG company kind of philosophy and a PG product, they've seen their audience dwindle some more, and it hasn't obviously been matched with a corresponding increase in advertising dollars. Why do I say that? Because look at the television deal the WWE got from NBC Universal. This was an attempt by them, by going PG in part, to sit there and draw in new revenue streams for the networks from these advertisers, to get more maybe higher, medium or higher dollar advertisers to come in and say, hey, look, we're not that type of wrestling. Well, at the end of the day, yeah, you are. No matter how much you call yourself sports entertainment, you still have that stigma of being professional wrestling. So maybe at some point in time, it's time to stop running away from that so much, because all of this bullshit that the WWE has tried to do over the years to distance themselves from pro wrestling, they obviously didn't do a very good job of it. Now, why do I say that? There are so many reasons, but ultimately, you look at this new television deal for WWE and you see the disaster that it is, and you see what it represents to this company, both from a short term and in particular long term standpoint, and it raises some real concerns about this company going forward in the years to come. Just watch.